Hello and welcome to the Route 66 radio show interview special, and on this one we've got a very special interview with a guitar legend. Joe Satriani joins me for a chat. Now he's currently on a UK tour. We spoke to him just before the tour kicked off over here in the United Kingdom. Dan Patlansky, of course, in support with him, so he talked about Dan's playing as well. Talked about loads of stuff, in fact, including what it's like to write instrumental tracks and how he narrows down the field of possibility to be as creative as he can be. We talked about lead singers and how some are born singers and some aren't, and lots of other stuff besides. So some music in this as well from Joe Satriani, and some footage which I filmed on my iPhone when I went to see him in Manchester the other night. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Joe Satriani, which I kicked off by asking Joe what it's like to be back up on stage in front of a live audience again.
We've covered maybe a little bit more than half of the first leg so far, and we're having a great time playing the new set. It's been a lot of fun, and of course having Dan out with us has been a lot of fun. He's one of those players that puts on a very dynamic show, and I'm always sort of backstage warming up, listening to his show, so it has a great positive effect on my musicianship every night. So we're having a good time.
Well, your latest album, Shockwave Supernova, it's a great album. Is it kind of a concept album? Is that fair? What's the story behind it?
It came about because I noticed on the last tour that I started playing with my teeth more and more, and I started doing, rock star guitar slinger type things a little bit more than I would probably normally do. But because we'd been out for over a year and a half, those things tend to creep in to your style, your live style. And I was thinking, first of all, I got to stop playing with my teeth and dropping to one knee and doing all that kind of stuff. And I was thinking, boy, what if it was a real problem? Like the kind of thing you read about online where a performer really goes off the deep end. Maybe there's, drugs and alcohol and all sorts of stuff involved, and they kind of lose their personality right in front of you, like the whole thing gets played out. It's like you're watching a performer go down in flames as their personality becomes sort of life imitating art kind of thing. And I thought, boy, this would be a great movie, and I could write a great soundtrack for this thing. Maybe I could use it as a concept to generate parameters to help me write new material and select material I had already written for the upcoming record. And then I thought, first of all, I got to give this guy a silly name. Like, what would a guy like that call himself, right? Someone extremely egotistical, someone who wanted to get all the attention in the room every time they walked in. So I came up with this name, Shockwave Supernova, and I thought, that's about as stupid as you can get.
Well, you're on Route 66. That was Shockwave Supernova, the opening track and the title from Joe Satriani's latest album. It's a great pleasure to have him on our show tonight. Joe, how do you keep coming up with fresh ideas? I mean, you're just talking there about having parameters with this concept album. Is that something that actually helps you to try and narrow down the field of possibility?
Yeah, you're right. Sometimes, it could be equipment. Like you say to yourself, I'm just going to write everything on some old, 1955 guitar that I've got to see if it adds some special mojo. Other times it might be a set of books or paintings that you decide I'm going to draw my inspiration from these things. And other times, like with Shockwave Supernova, it's a real story. And that provides enough information that, as you said, sets up parameters, so it keeps you focused. So the album doesn't become just general. Or the thing that I'm always afraid of is that the records might just sound like somebody playing. And that's not what I enjoy doing, is having a record that's just playing with no real direction in it. I like to have each record represent something special so that the fans can identify the record as having a definite feel, a definite set of emotional stories and concepts that they can relate to. That, I think, gives the playing special meaning for both me and the fans.
Yeah. Well, let's go back a little bit further, Joe, to Unstoppable Momentum, which I loved. I thought that was a particularly great piece of work, and it'd been a while since your last album before that one, so it was great to have you back on tour, and that was the first time I went to see you here in Manchester. I went with my godfather, Fergus, who at the end of the gig said to me, well, I was blown away by that, I loved it, and I really didn't think a guy playing guitar with no vocals was going to hold my attention for 2 hours, but he totally did. Are you ever tempted to do vocals, or are you just so convinced that you can do it without that actually your guitar skill is more than enough on its own?
Well, that question really, it's a very deep question, because I fell into the instrumentals quite by accident. I wasn't looking to become an instrumentalist. I released some recordings on my own label as an exercise in musicianship and getting into the music business. And I was thinking I was just going to be a guitar player in a vocal-oriented rock band. But this other thing just took off. And before I knew it, I had my second full-length album on the charts. The label wanted me to tour behind it, and I had never even done it before. I'd never, walked on stage as an instrumental act before, and that was with Surfing with the Alien, and it was trial by fire. And I realized, wow, this could be very interesting. This music that I write for myself and I play at home, now people want to hear me do it. So it's been an interesting journey to see that happen. Now, you've got to add to this the fact that I'm not really a very good singer. So it was a bit of a relief, I was always like the second singer or the backup singer in all the rock bands I was in. And I was lucky to always be in bands with great singers. I tell people, I can hit the notes and I can memorize the melodies, but I don't have that special lead singer gift of being able to communicate, lyrics vocally, which, supersedes, I think, vocal quality. Some singers are just, they have pipes, and they can hit any note. And then they have comrades who are equally good at communicating who can't, have a very limited range or a scratchy throat or something. So,
like Brian Johnson from AC/DC, for instance.
Yes. Now, he's a born lead singer, but, he's no Freddie Mercury, but at the same time, you can't say one is better than the other. I mean, they're both perfect at what they do. But I'm not one of those guys. I'm a musician who can sing, but I'm not a lead singer. So I try to not remind people of that on tour.
Well, before we move away from Unstoppable Momentum, I want to play a track from it, Shine On American Dreamer. Just briefly tell me a little bit about the story behind that one.
Well, that was a difficult one to convey, but it was really about the economic debacle of 2008 and the fact that greed, not only in America, but specifically in America, had robbed the average citizen of decades of savings, purely for greed. And there were a lot of warning signs, and there were good people in the government and financial institutions who were waving red flags, trying to warn people that this was coming. And it was primarily the over-servicing of subprime loans and how they turned savings into economic instruments for investment and sold them and resold them and repackaged them. And before you know it, once it all fell down, it took down, little towns in Norway and big cities all across the United States. And I thought, it takes each citizen every day to try to be good, to try to do things right, to make a country work. And so I was sort of moved to write this song that was focusing on the good of the citizenry and the country itself in the U.S., and not to be overwhelmed by all the terrible things that we do as a country sometimes. We get ourselves stuck in the mud. Like most big countries, there's stuff in our history that is so completely regrettable and undoable that it's hard sometimes to go forward. But that's all we've got. Time moves forward. And most people are good and they want to do good, but they have to be reminded to be proactive. And so the song is really about that.
Earlier in the show, Joe, we played a track from G3, one of the ones from the first G3 concert with Eric Johnson and Steve Vai. You've played with loads of great people over the years. Those guys, John Petrucci, Yngwie Malmsteen, and you did that thing with Mick Jagger as well, of course. I mean, how good is it, how exciting is it for you to play with all these people? And these side projects are clearly popular, so when's the next one going to happen?
Oh, I love doing it. I mean, it's one of those things that I think it keeps the inspiration flowing when you're standing next to Mick Jagger or playing with Deep Purple or all the guys you mentioned on all the G3 concerts that I put together. And probably more recently, the last few years with Chickenfoot has been really a great sort of door opening into a kind of creativity that I was sort of pointed away from because I got so deep into the instrumentals. It was great to be able to play with Chad, Mike, and Sammy and to revisit those early days of classic rock that we all grew up listening to. So I love these side projects, and I'm still sort of trying to twist the arms of the guys in Chickenfoot to do at least one more record. I'm not quite sure how that's going, but I'm going to keep working on them.
Well, please do. The last ones have been great, and it's a really good kind of partnership, and it sounds very lively and fun. In terms of your guitar heroes yourself, I mean, I know you're a fan of Hendrix. Who isn't? But I mean, who else? Jeff Beck? I mean, who else do you really admire?
Well, you know, when I was younger and starting to learn how to play, I grew up listening to Keith Richards and George Harrison. Then I got deep into Hendrix and Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton. And then a couple of years later, just as I started playing, Billy Gibbons and Brian May were also very big influences on my playing. I inherited a crazy record collection from my older siblings. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. So by the time I really started to focus in on guitar and my siblings were leaving the house, I wound up with rock and roll records from the late 50s all the way through the 60s, British Invasion, soul music, Motown, funk, the beginning of rock music, heavy metal. I was playing Black Sabbath and Stones and Jethro Tull and The Doors and music like that in my high school bands, as well as Deep Purple. So I've got so many sides to my style because I appreciated all these great players. They were all rather unique in their own way, and I picked up as much as I could from all of them.
Well, it certainly shows in the diversity of your playing. I'd like to conclude this interview, Joe, by playing out with one of my favourite instrumental tracks of all time. In fact, it probably is one of my favourite tracks of all time. It's from your Extremist album, Friends. There's just something about it which, every time I listen to it, takes me somewhere different, and it's always somewhere good. And I'd just love you to tell us a little bit about that before we finish.
Oh, I'm glad you like that. We've actually been playing that in the set on this tour, and it's a song that got its start, actually, as I was looking through a book of photographs of children playing with each other around the world, just kids in all different countries, just smiling at the camera, doing things that kids do, getting dirty, playing with toys and sports and whatever. There's a unifying energy that you see when you're looking at kids from Canada or kids from Africa or from Lapland or, at the end of South America. And it's that innocence and the positive energy, the sort of selfless friendship that young people show each other. And I actually had this book open and I wrote that song on a bass guitar. And probably it was one of those songs that got finished maybe in about an hour and a half. It was very quick. The interesting story about how it got made, though, was that it was very difficult to record. And I was making the second half of the Extremist record was being completed with Andy Johns, the great engineer and producer. And I relied on his background to help me finish the arrangement of the melody, because I said to him, I really want this to have just a little bit of a Celtic vibe to it, but what do I know, right? I'm an Italian American from New York, so you gotta help me here. And not only did he help me by, being the critic, which is what you need a producer to be, is just to criticize in a positive way as you show different ideas. But the mix that wound up on the record was something that he did very quickly at the end of the night when we weren't really doing the real mix. And right as it got to the end of the last sustaining notes, he quickly pulled down the fader and asked the assistant to give him the DAT. I think that's what we were using back then. And so he could take it home and listen to it. And it wound up being the mix that we couldn't replicate. So it wound up on the record. That's why it has such a fast fade out.
Fantastic bit of kind of inside knowledge to finish up with, Joe. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you on Route 66, and good luck with the rest of the tour as well.
Thank you, Rory. Nice to talk to you.
Find us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Rockin' Jockin'.